All right, everybody, I'm Sean Russell. Welcome back to our presentation. And today we have Stuart Waldner, who is an activist and author of the book, Escape the Meatrix. Everybody put your hands together for Stuart Waldner.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Welcome to Georgia's Veg Fest. It's great to be kicking off day 2, Sunday morning here at the Veg Fest. So we hear a lot about sustainability these days, and mainstream media is often saying that, we need to move away from burning fossil fuels like natural gas, coal, and oil, and embrace green energy solutions like solar and wind, and we need to start driving electric vehicles, right? Well, climate scientists say that those two things alone are not going to allow us to achieve our climate goals, that we also need to decarbonize the global food production system. So I'll be talking about that today. But speaking of climate goals, what are our climate goals? So scientists say that we want to prevent heating the Earth more than 1.5 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial temperatures. And that way, we will avert experiencing some of the worst case scenarios of climate change. We'll still have some extreme weather, but we won't have it as badly. So currently, we are at 1.1 degrees Celsius. So we're a little bit over 2/3 of the way to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And something very interesting happened this summer. It's called the El Nino effect. So you may have heard about this in the news. So the surface temperatures of the tropical Pacific Ocean fluctuate, and sometimes they're cool, sometimes they're warmer. And this is all about the interconnectivity of everything on the planet. So when these things happen in the Pacific, it doesn't just stay in the Pacific, it affects weather all over the planet. So we're in El Nino right now, which means the surface temperatures are warmer than usual. So guess what? Scientists have said that this summer we have, for the first time, been experiencing 1.5 degrees Celsius. We are experiencing what it might look like to live in a 1.5 degrees Celsius world. And I don't know about you, but this summer has been pretty darn scary about what's been happening. I mean, there was this huge heat dome over so much of the American Southwest all summer. Phoenix, Arizona broke a record for the number of days exceeding 110 degrees. The temperature of the coastal waters in Florida reached 101 degrees. Scientists were taking coral out of the ocean to try to save it. We saw huge wildfires in Canada. I saw pictures of Manhattan, and it looked like Beijing, China 20 years ago when I was there. I mean, the sky was so polluted. And then recently, like this past week, we had a tropical storm went up the Baja Peninsula into California. Places in California received a year's worth of rainfall in one day. So we're having extreme weather events thanks to climate change and El Nino. Unfortunately, El Nino is going to recede at some point. We'll bring the global average temperature down, and we'll get a little bit of a break from this. But scientists said, one news media said, this isn't global warming, this is global boiling. This is what we've been experiencing this summer. So it's amazing. So speaking of climate change, did you hear earlier this year that there were memos that were leaked to the media that the fossil fuel industry knew as early as the 1970s what their products were going to do, what they were already doing at the time, and what they were going to do to the Earth? Yeah, so they knew, the fossil fuel industry knew about climate change and what their products were going to do. So what happened? They took that information and they did a hard pivot into renewable energies, and they invested in solar and wind, right? No, they buried the information. They suppressed it. And they did a misinformation campaign. They tried to convince us that climate change was a hoax. And they actually hired scientists to go out and say that climate change was all fake. They've done a really amazing job, right? Well, the meat and dairy industry is shocking for me to find out that they're doing the exact same thing. So what I'm going to share with you today are things that the meat and dairy industry does not want you to know about their products and the damage that they're doing to the environment, just like fossil fuel industries didn't want us to know about climate change. So how do I know this? Because between the years 2000 and 2019, the meat industry in the United States spent $200 million lobbying Congress against enacting climate change legislation. Why would the meat industry care about climate change legislation? We'll get to that in a minute. Relative to each company's revenue, Tyson Chicken spends 33% more on political campaigns than ExxonMobil. Why is the meat industry so invested in our politics? Well, something happened, another thing that they don't want you to know about, and I share all of this in my book, Escape the Meatrix, by the way. So in 2015, the new dietary guidelines came out. Every 5 years, our government publishes a new set of dietary guidelines that are supposed to be based on the latest nutritional science. But my book talks about how that doesn't happen. But for the first time ever, the guidelines said that a vegan lifestyle was healthier, more sustainable, and was better at fighting climate change than the standard American diet. That was in 2015. What happened? The Meatrix had a fit. And they lobbied Congress hard. And 1 year later, in 2016, that verbiage was stripped from the guidelines, and it was buried in an appropriations bill, of all things. So the meat industry doesn't want Americans associating the food on their plates with the environment and with climate change. So they're very protective of their product, and they don't want us to make the connections. I believe that if you're not a part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So I'm hoping everyone will walk away from my talk today wanting to be part of the solution, because it's never been more important. You know, we're at a critical time on our planet, from climate change to emerging infectious diseases, biodiversity loss, mass extinction rates, our declining health, to the horrible return on investment of animal agriculture. I mean, the signs are all around us. And hearing a list like that, I know, can be kind of depressing. But the amazing thing that I learned while I was researching my book is that all of those things and more are connected to the food on our plates and choices that we're making in the grocery aisle. So today, it's about hope. And it's about, agency. We have a choice, and a lot of people don't think we do have that choice, but we do have the choice, and it's a powerful choice, and we're going to find out just how powerful it is with today's presentation. Before we dive into that, though, I have to bust a couple myths that are really prevalent in the green sustainability movement within food, okay? Because I fell victim to both of these, and so I wanted to share these things with you. So the first one is about plastic bags. Okay, I'm gonna show my age right now, because I remember when you only had one option at the grocery store, and it was a brown paper bag, okay? And that's how I grew up. Then what happened, grocery stores started introducing these plastic bags. And this was before there were self-checkout lanes. So when you went through the register, the person bagging the groceries would say, do you want paper or plastic? Well, I took a stand. I was not gonna ever use single-use plastics, ever. And I always went for the paper bag, because I was taking a stand for the environment, and I was doing something green and good for the earth, right? So then what happened? They phased out the paper bags. They only had plastic bags at the grocery. And so what did I do? Well, I went out and bought me a cotton tote so I could carry my groceries back and forth in this bag. And I'd proudly walk into the grocery store, flaunting my bag, virtue signaling, hey, look at me, I got my bag, you can do this too, we can stick it to the man, Come on, y'all, let's do it. So, unfortunately, a Dutch study came out recently, and it supports some previous studies that said that the most benign bag you can use for your groceries are these plastic bags. Of all the other options we have, this is the most benign. It has the least impact on climate change and the environment. So this study said that if you use one of these plastic bags twice, once to bring your groceries home and once another time to line a trash can liner, so using it twice, how many times do you think you'd have to use a brown paper bag for it to have the same carbon footprint and environmental impact as one of these plastic bags? Any guesses? 5 times? Twice? You would have to use that brown paper bag 43 times for it to have the same impact as using one of these plastic bags twice. I could never extend the life of a brown paper bag 43 times. Now, your mileage may vary, but I'm seeing people shaking their head no, that they couldn't do that. Well, guess what? The cotton tote bag that I bought to carry my groceries in, guess how many times I'd have to use a cotton tote bag for it to have the same impact as using one of these plastic bags twice? 50 times? 100? 7,100 times. I would have to use that cotton tote bag once a day, every day for 19 years for it to have the same carbon footprint as these plastic bags. And if I bought an organic cotton bag, because organic cotton has a lower yield, an organic cotton bag, you'd have to use it 20,000 times. So my point is, we often think we're doing something good for the earth and for the environment, and because everyone wants to do the right thing. You know, people want to make better choices for the planet and for the future, but we want to make sure that our actions are actually having the desired impact. The main thing is, no matter what bag you're using now, use it until it falls apart. Don't switch bags now. Whatever you got, use it until it cannot hold anything again. And you know what the most important thing is? It's not the bag you're using, it's what goes in the bag. And the next myth is about buying local food. So I talked at a sustainability festival earlier this summer, and they had a food truck there. And in my town, we have a vegan food truck. And I thought, it's a sustainability festival. Surely they're going to have the vegan food truck there. No. The food truck they had was proudly advertising that all of their ingredients were locally sourced. So it was full of animal-based food, so chicken, fish, meat, cheese, everything, but it was all local. So that's sustainable, right? That's really good for the environment. Well, look at this chart right here. These are greenhouse gas emissions across the supply chain of all these foods. Beef is the top one, and transport is what we're looking at, this red color. And if you look, only 0.5% of beef's greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. Bananas have the lowest carbon footprint here at the bottom. Bananas, you know, their carbon emissions are so much less, but 32% of their greenhouse gas emissions come from transport, and it's still at the bottom of the list. So it's a myth that buying local food is better for the environment. I'm all for supporting my community and shopping locally as best as I can. Keeping money into the community is a great idea, but you know, it's a myth to think that when we do that with food that we're making the earth greener, because we're not. And the science I share in my book says that it's better for us to import plant-based foods from the other side of the planet than it is to source beef from our next door neighbor, the farmer down the street. What are sustainable foods? So sustainable foods require less land to grow, use less water to produce, they emit fewer greenhouse gas emissions, they contribute less to biodiversity loss and mass extinction rates, they have greater resilience and more. So these are the characteristics of sustainable foods. And the resilience part is important because as our earth changes, we're getting drier and hotter, more droughts, and so we need to find foods that can sustain those types of changes in the climate. So resilience, finding those crops that we can use, is going to be really, really important. So this chart is in my book, and I have a lot of different charts in my book. I have over 400 citations in my book, so it's a science-based book, but it's a very easy to read book. I have a lot of anecdotes from my personal life in there. I've been doing this for a long time. I gave up eating meat 38 years ago. I've been vegan 18 years, 15 of the last consecutive, so I've been doing this for a while, but I love these charts because they are potent visual representations of the science that I'm sharing in my book. And they're saying that plant-based foods are far superior to animal-based foods in every environmental category. So in this one chart alone, we have 5 different categories. We have greenhouse gases, land use, energy use, acidification potential, and eutrophication potential. And so the foods that are green are plant-based foods. Dairy and eggs are yellow, fish blue, and meat red. And you can just, if you just take a quick glance at this chart, you can see that plant-based foods are killing it. I mean, they are so much more sustainable for our planet than meat and dairy. And this is another chart I have in my book. This one is for protein-rich foods because when you tell someone you're even thinking about going plant-based, the first thing they'll ask is, where are you going to get your protein? Oh my God, you're going to be protein deprived. So I wanted to show this chart here because, when you do this, you do want to be aware of your protein intake. But the science that I share in my book says as long as you're eating enough calories in a day from a variety of food sources, preferably whole, unprocessed fruits, vegetables, seeds, nuts, legumes, as long as you're getting enough calories from that, you're meeting all your protein needs. But if you look at this chart here, these 4 at the bottom are plant-based foods. And then this purple section is methane, which we're going to talk about methane in a minute. But even if you take out the methane, most of these plant-based foods have a footprint that's 10 times less than animal-based foods. So that's how much better they are for the environment. We should talk about methane. Methane is a powerful greenhouse gas. So this chart says short-lived and long-lived greenhouse gases. Long-lived greenhouse gases stay in the atmosphere for centuries. And all these greenhouse gases are measured against carbon dioxide. So they have CO2e, so carbon dioxide equivalents. And they're measured also, they're looking at the global warming potential of these gases. So they're being measured against carbon. So methane is a short-lived greenhouse gas, but it's very potent. In the first 20 years, first of all, after about 12 years, most of the methane is gone from the atmosphere. But in the first 20 years, it is 80 times more efficient at trapping heat into our atmosphere than carbon dioxide, 80 times worse. Where does methane come from? Ruminant animals belch methane because they have a multi-chambered stomach, and when they digest their food, they produce methane. And then over a 100-year period, methane is 25 times more potent at trapping heat in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. And guess what? According to the EPA, the largest single source of methane in the United States comes from livestock. So that's why I say ruminant meat, cows, sheep, lamb, and goats, that's the low-hanging fruit when it comes to sustainable foods and climate change. If you only make one change, you can get rid of red meat, basically. Eliminate that from your diet, and you're doing an awful lot, not only for your health, but for the animals, but that's a huge impact for the planet. We had the 1-year anniversary just recently of the Inflation Reduction Act that was Congress enacted last year. And it's the first piece of legislation that the United States has created to help combat climate change emissions, to help curb them. And I think this is great. Historically speaking, the United States has been the largest emitter of greenhouse gases. So it makes, I don't know why this keeps going out, but it is important that we do this. But the Inflation Reduction Act is just the beginning. I mean, I downloaded it and looked at it, and it does talk about methane, but it does not talk about methane from animals at all. It totally ignores it. And how are they not talking about that when the EPA says the single largest source of methane comes from animals, but we're ignoring it? These are 2 other charts that I have in my book that also illustrates how plant-based foods are more superior to animal-based foods when it comes to environment and resources. So on the left, you see land use per 1,000 kilocalories of food. The top 2 are ruminant animals, beef and lamb and mutton. It takes 100 times more land to produce a gram of protein from beef than it does from tofu. 100 times more land. Animal-based foods use 75% of the global farmland. I'll say that again. Animal-based foods use 75% of global farmland while providing 18% of global calories. 75% of the land that we could use for farming, and we're only getting 18% of our calories from that. That's a horrible return on investment. We cannot continue to get such a pitiful return on our investment. And then off to the right here is water usage per ton of food. Again, number one, no surprise here, beef. So that's why eliminating beef is so important. It saves so many resources. Unfortunately, the next one down is nuts. You can get good protein from nuts if you're plant-based, but unfortunately they are water intensive. And so there's been some pushback about nut milks as a replacement for dairy, and people have complained, some people have said, you know, those almond trees are so thirsty, y'all. Well, it's still using a third of the water that cow's milk uses, for one. So you're saving a lot of water right there. But almond trees sequester a lot of carbon. So yeah, they are thirsty, but they are also helping the environment by pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. So we have to keep that in mind. And then as far as water goes, earlier this year, you may have heard about this, there's a real threat that the Colorado River may run dry. And this is a real problem because states like California, Arizona, and Nevada use that water. And so earlier this year, those three states got together and came up with a new way of allocating the water to help preserve the Colorado River because of climate change and severe droughts. The water that comes out of the Colorado River that gets used, 12% of it is used by residents, only 12%. 55% of the water that we take out of the Colorado River is used to grow alfalfa, hay, grasses, corn silage for livestock. 55%. So when I talk about animal agriculture being a horrible return on investment, it is. It's incredible. It's using so many resources and precious resources. So, you know, we have the two largest sinks, carbon sinks on the planet, of course, are the oceans and the earth. So anytime that we can give land back to the earth, we're going to be storing more carbon into it. So 70% of the grain that we grow in the United States, and this is grain, this is food humans could eat, 70% of what we grow, grain-wise, we're feeding to livestock. You know, why are we able to feed billions of animals and we can't feed all of the humans? That's so messed up, and you know, I just, you know, boggles my mind that we do that. But that's because we think we need to do it. We were born into the Meatrix, and we think we need all these animals and all these animal foods to be healthy and strong, when we don't. That's a myth, and we've been taught that from birth. As soon as I could eat solid food, my parents were pureeing animal-based foods and giving it to me, thinking that they were doing something good for me. And why did they do that? They weren't doing it consciously. They did it because their parents did it to them and their parents before them. This is a tradition that just keeps getting passed down from one generation to the other. And because it's all we've ever known, we think eating animal-based foods is natural, necessary, and nutritious, when it's the science in my book shows it's none of those things. But we think it is because it's what we've been taught from a very early age. And the meat and dairy industries are relentless in advertising their products to us. And over a course of a lifetime, we just become to believe that this is necessary. So if we instead grew crops for human consumption instead of animal consumption, in this country alone, how many additional people do you think that we could feed? So we have over 300 million people in the country now. So we're growing 70% of our grain, we're growing for livestock. If we stop that and we said, okay, we're going to just grow crops for humans, how many additional people could we feed? We could feed an additional 1 billion people without using any other farmland, just the existing farmland. We could feed another 1 billion people. And globally, we could feed an additional 4 billion people on this planet. That is, you know, amazing. We don't need to feed an extra 1 billion people in the United States. So what does that mean? We could give land back to nature. And you know, we can go and plant trees. Planting trees is great. It's kind of like one of those plastic bag myths, though, because when we plant a tree, it does store carbon, but not as much as if we just give the land back to nature. Let nature do its thing and rewild the land, and we actually store more carbon than if we try to plant trees. So we could stop growing food for animals and growing food for humans and give all this land back and start storing so much more carbon. And that's a win-win. Stephen Chu, this is a quote from him. He's the president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. He's a Nobel Prize recipient and was the Energy Secretary of the United States. And he says that if cattle and dairy cows were a country, they would have more greenhouse gas emissions than the entire EU 28. He said that before Brexit. So it's really, now it's the EU 27 and the UK. But that is a mind-boggling statement when you think about it. But when you are born into the Meatrix, like I was, you think that these cows are necessary, right? We have to have them, so that they can't be part of our climate solution. They're a given. It's something that we have to have, but that we don't. We don't have to have these animals at all. And we could drastically reduce our carbon emissions in our food system by getting rid of cows. And then the lead environmental scientist at the World Bank Group said that livestock and their products actually account for at least 32,564 million tons of CO2e per year, or 51% of annual worldwide greenhouse gas emissions. 51%. Now, if you listen to most mainstream media will say that the animal agriculture is responsible for 14.5% of global emissions, which is still higher than the transportation sector. But that figure is way too low, and I'll talk about this in my book, because what they didn't account for, they didn't even account for methane in that study of only saying it was 14.5%. They included very controversial things like carbon sequestration by livestock, which has not been proven to even come close to offsetting the emissions from cows. And they totally excluded farmed fish. Some farmed fish have more greenhouse gas emissions than beef. Tilapia, shrimp, and catfish, depending on the source of energy that's used to circulate the water, they can have more greenhouse gas emissions than beef. So, and that's insane, because 96% of the fish in Europe is farmed fish, and I think like 66% in Asia now is farmed fish. So we now have these amazing plant-based meat alternatives on the market. I love them because, for me, they are a gateway plant-based food. Making the transition away from meat so much easier because, you know, if you're like me, I grew up, my mom, she centered every meal around a piece of animal protein on my plate. And a meal wasn't a meal if it didn't have chicken or a burger or something at the middle of it. And the vegetables were just playing second fiddle, you know, to the main attraction, which was the meat. And so a lot of people, you know, build their menus around this. So if you can just swap out a beef burger with a plant-based meat alternative or a chicken, you get to use your same recipe that you grew up enjoying, and it's so much healthier for you, and it's better for the planet. So for instance, a Beyond Burger compared to a beef burger generates 90% fewer greenhouse gas emissions, requires 46% less energy, has 99% less impact on water scarcity, and has 93% less impact on land use. That is a huge win for the planet. And you know, it saves so many resources. So it's a processed food for sure. You know, I encourage people to adopt a whole foods, plant-based lifestyle and try to limit processed foods as much as possible in our diets. But even then, I mean, I will grill up a Beyond Burger, you know, once, twice a month. I mean, I enjoy it. You know, eating one salad doesn't make you healthy, and eating one steak doesn't ruin your health. So eating one of these processed burgers every now and then, or a plant-based chicken alternative, even though it is processed, it's not going to harm your health in any way. It actually will be better for you than eating the animal products, and it's a win for the planet, and of course the animals appreciate it too. So. The Anthropocene is the epoch that we're living in now, where humans are having the greatest impact on the environment and on the climate. So that's just what that means, Anthropocene. So this commission came together from the Lancet. So the Lancet is a weekly peer-reviewed medical journal. And so they wanted to look at, you know, how can we achieve our climate goals as set out by the Paris Accord and by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And we have all these goals to become carbon neutral by 2050. And so they're saying, well, the only way we can reach these goals is by changing the food too, which I said earlier. So they looked at, you know, what would diets have to become for us to have a sustainable food production. The first thing that they said was 820 million people on the planet are food insecure. They don't get enough food, and a much larger number of people on the planet are nutritionally insecure because they're not getting the nutrients that they need from their diet. Their recommendations for animal-based foods all begin at 0 grams a day. That's where they start. The only exception is for in Southeast Asia, many children suffer from stunting, and they said you could have like maybe 1 to 5 eggs per week that could prevent stunting in children. But they said isocaloric foods, so foods that had the same caloric value, could be substituted and would be better, because eggs are associated with non-communicable diseases, right? So even then, they're saying plant-based foods, if they were available, would be better. And then the other thing that really shook me to my core was that they said global food production threatens the stability of the Earth system. And I think that would be shocking for most people to hear. I think most people would think, oh, the fossil fuel industry is the biggest threat, or all these cars that we're driving, or factories. No, it's the global food production. Trying to feed 8 billion people meat and dairy is destroying the planet. We have 8 billion people on the planet, and they're saying by the year 2050, we're going to have 10 billion people on the planet. That's an increase of about 22%. It's estimated that the demand for meat and dairy will increase in that time span 60%. So we're going to see an increase of demand for meat and dairy of 60% between now and 2050. Guess what, y'all? The Earth can't support that. There's no way that we can feed that many people a diet centered on animal-based foods. There's not enough land, there's not enough resources, as you can see from just the charts that I've showed here today. So globally, we're becoming more carnivorous, even though the plant-based movement in the United States is growing. And it hasn't been steady growth in the United States, it's been exponential. We've seen like a 300% increase in people who identify as plant-based eaters in just the last 5 years or so, and it's quadrupled in the UK. But globally, as people become more affluent, they associate affluence with a meat-centered diet. Guess what? Because that's what we've exported all over the planet. I don't know about you, I've just started watching America's Got Talent. I didn't watch it for many years, but I started back watching it. And it's interesting now because they're not just having talent from America. Talent's coming from all over the world. And they're performing on this stage. And the judges will say, well, how are you enjoying America? What have you done? Almost inevitably, the person says they went and got a cheeseburger. Right? I mean, you hear it over and over. This is what people identify with our culture. It's a cheeseburger culture. It's a steak culture. And this is getting exported all over the world. And guess what? The world can't handle that. It's just impossible to do. So people say, well, we're going to, we can make global food production of animal-based foods, we can make them more sustainable. I know there are dairy farms that are trying to capture the methane emissions from their cows and converting it into biogas and trying to have a carbon neutral loop in their production of dairy. It's very high tech, unproven, and not something that you could do globally. Or there's people who say, we can do a rotational grazing of livestock. And that way, animals can store carbon in the earth when they're grazing. Wouldn't that be great? So I was listening to a podcast. The three guys were talking on this podcast is all about carbon. So they're saying, yeah, we can do this rotational grazing. And farmers are a little resistant to it at first because what you have to do is you have to take your field and you actually need more land. You have to divide it into 4 sections. And you have to have additional fencing. And then you have to bring water into every pasture. And then you got to rotate the animals from one field to the other. And then while they're munching and excreting on the ground, they move to the next pasture. So the idea is that they're storing carbon into the earth. Well, guess what? the most that they could sequester ever under optimal situation, perfect number of animals per acre, perfect soil, moisture content, everything. The most you could ever hope to sequester of their emissions is 22%. So these three guys on this carbon podcast can't see the elephant in the room or the cow in the room, because they're in the matrix. To them, the cow is a given. It's something that has to be there. But when you escape the matrix, you see, just get rid of the cow. And you reduce their emissions 100%, not 22%. I mean, come on. I mean, it's a no-brainer. So what this study showed that across all of agriculture, we could lower emissions by about 10% by 2050 through enhanced techniques. But if we adopt plant-based diets, we could reduce global emissions by 80%. I've given you a lot of numbers and a lot of information today, and if you walk away here with only remembering one thing, it's 73%. So there was a 5-year study by Oxford University. They analyzed 38,000 farms in 119 countries. And they determined that in America, where we eat 3 times more meat per capita than the global average, that when we give up meat and become plant-based, we could lower our personal carbon footprint 73%. There's no single other thing that we could do as a human to lower our carbon footprint that much. We can stop taking flights. We could take shorter showers, we could drive an electric car. There's a lot of things that we think we could do that could have a big impact, but nothing comes close to just giving up animal-based foods and becoming plant-based. A person who is following a plant-based lifestyle every day, they save 1,100 gallons of water, 45 pounds of grain, 35 square feet of forest, 20 pounds of carbon dioxide equivalent in the life of an animal every day. That's how many resources that we save when we divest ourselves from animal agriculture and eat only plants. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that every day an animal is being freed from the matrix and going to live on an animal sanctuary somewhere. I know that's not happening, but I know that I'm not causing the death of an animal today because of the food that I'm putting on my plate. So I know our system doesn't, work like at the end of a year there's 365 chickens running around on an animal farm sanctuary because I didn't eat them. No, but I do feel amazing knowing that I have divested myself from an industry that's destroying the planet and doing all this damage and unnecessary harm to human health and, of course, to the animals. So people say, well, Stuart, that's all great. It's going to save the earth. But if I give up eating animals, I'm going to ruin my health, right? I mean, my health is going to go down the toilet. Wrong. Okay, so the National Institute of Health sent a memo to every physician in the United States, and the memo said doctors should recommend a plant-based lifestyle to all their patients, especially those with high blood pressure, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, or obesity. In their conclusion, they write, the future of healthcare will involve an evolution toward a paradigm where the prevention and treatment of disease is centered not on a pill or surgical procedure, but on another serving of fruits and vegetables. How cool is that? I went to a Future of Food Summit last year, and I heard about a pilot program in Washington, D.C., where doctors were prescribing fruits and vegetables. So the government is paying doctors to write a prescription for whole fruits and vegetables to their patients. Why would the government be spending money in this way? Well, it's because this is just a pilot program, but already they have learned that for every dollar they spend on one of these prescriptions, they're saving $3 in healthcare costs. And this is just the beginning. This is the tip of the iceberg, because so many of the chronic conditions that Americans suffer from are lifestyle problems. They're conditions that happen over the course of your life from eating foods that aren't healthy for you. So I think this is the future. I think we will see doctors prescribing, writing prescriptions for fruits and vegetables. Why not? It works and it saves money, lowers healthcare costs. People can come off some of their medications for high blood pressure, cholesterol. I mean, it's amazing. That's the power of plants. Also, the U.S. Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics says that plant-based foods contain all the nutrients that we need to be healthy at any stage of life. So eating this way is not only better for the earth and the animals, but it's better for us too. You may be asking yourself, do I need to become 100% plant-based? You don't have to be 100%, and they may not invite me back next year to the Veg Fest. I realize that. I'm going out on a limb here, but I'm just telling you, if you're trying to do this because you're concerned about animal welfare, then yes, being 100% vegan is aligning your actions with your core values. And so if that's how you feel, and I'm one of those people, I strive to be 100% plant-based. Now, I try to be. I know I'm not perfect. No one's perfect. And that's a problem, I think, that we have in the plant-based vegan movement is perfectionism. And we judge people when they're not being perfect. And we judge ourselves when we're not perfect. If we accidentally eat something, or we purposefully eat something that came from an animal, we can beat ourselves up over it. That's not good. I think we all are trying to do and should try to do the best we can where we are with what we have at the time. So if you're concerned about your health and the health of the planet, any reduction that you can make in your consumption of animal-based foods will help. This is a great quote from Mark Twain. The less there is to justify a traditional custom, the harder it is to get rid of it. I hope that you have seen from the slides and the information I shared with you today that we can no longer justify eating meat. The tradition of meat eating has to come to an end if we are to survive as a species on this planet. The problem is, it's hard to get rid of something that you can't justify, like Mark Twain said. It is ubiquitous. Eating meat is all over our culture. It's never been easier to be plant-based or vegan than it is today. So I encourage everybody to choose the red pill and escape the matrix, because staying in the matrix is choosing the blue pill. And that's tantamount to maintaining the status quo. And we can just look around and see where that's getting us. When we stay trapped in the matrix, we're lining the pockets of some of the wealthiest 1% of the people on this planet. These meat and dairy companies are huge conglomerates. They are some of the wealthiest people on the planet. And when we're buying their products, we're lining their pockets, we're destroying our health, and destroying the planet. So I encourage people to follow the science. My book is science-based, and I think when people read the science, then they will start making more informed decisions, and they will make better decisions for themselves and for the planet, starting with the food on their plates. So I encourage everyone to choose the red pill, escape the matrix, eat plants, feel great, and save the planet. So thank you all. You've been a really great audience. Does anybody have any questions quickly before I finish up? Yes?
What do you think about the lab-based meats on the environment and our culture, and are you in support of it?
So lab-grown meat is not proven to be able to be done at a scale that could make any kind of difference. And there's a lot of reasons why, but when you're growing cells in a vat with no animal, there's no immune system. So that system needs to stay pristine. You introduce one speck of a contaminant into that, and the whole thing collapses. And that's the problem they're having. They can do it in small batches, but they can't do it to any size scale that could make a difference. And we still have to feed those cells. What are we feeding the cells? I don't know yet. I just know that there's an environmental footprint for that too, so we have to take that into account. And then fermentation is how they do it, and that creates a lot of heat. And so these facilities need to be cooled. So then where is that energy coming from? So I think it's a high-tech solution that's not proven to really tip the scales in any significant way, whereas a plant-based lifestyle is a low-tech solution to a problem and we know that it would work. So I think there's a lot of people spending a lot of money on high-tech solutions for problems we have a very low-tech solution for. So that would be my answer to that.
And so how do we help fellow consumers, help others make it make the plant-based lifestyle sexy to where they can adopt it?
Okay, the question is, how do we make the plant-based lifestyle sexy so they'll want to adopt it? Yeah, I think a lot of people are wondering about that. You know, there's a lot of stigma associated with vegans and plant-based eating, and you know, we have ourselves to blame for a lot of that because we've been very militant, and you know, but we got to make this like a party that people want to join because it is a fun place to be. It's so much better, and you feel so much better. Have you heard of vegan dales? They are like, it's called Vegan Dale. They have them in New York, Toronto, Chicago. It's like a big vegan party. And they have music and DJs and all these food. I mean, they're gonna have one in New York City this fall, and they're expecting 40,000 people. And it's all like 70% of them are meat eaters. And I think that's how, you know, we attract them by making it festive, making it a party, helping people realize that this is a really positive movement and something to embrace, and also by letting people know it doesn't have to be 100%. You know, if we can get 1 million people to reduce their meat consumption in half versus 1,000 people who are strict vegans, you know, we're going to be doing better getting 1 million people to reduce their consumption, you know. So we have to loosen up, you know, our ideas of what all this means, because we got to look at the big picture now. We can't think, oh, you know, everyone has to be 100% vegan or they're not my friend or whatever. So I think that those two things will go a long way. And also, you know, this has to be from above and below. You know, we as consumers need to do our thing, but government needs to change the farm bill and subsidies. I go into all this in my book. So it has to be from above and from below. So I'm really running out of time. So I'll be at my booth. I'll be selling my book there. I have all these slides printed out if you want to look at the graphs or whatever. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. And you've been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. Appreciate you being here. And yeah, let's go. Eat plants.
All right, let's give it up for Stuart.